We invest a lot of ourselves in our vehicles. They're the only technology where we actually enclose ourselves inside it and move around in the world. And with the transition to electric vehicles, as anyone who's driven one can attest, it feels different, it sounds different, it accelerates different.
Reporter David Ferris covers electric vehicles for Politico. He's describing a huge transformation taking place on our roads and highways.
And when you are in the position of needing to fuel that car, not at gas stations, not with the liquid fuel we've all used for a century, but you need to use an entirely new system that's never been employed at big scale before, you run into really big challenges.
In 2019, he and some other reporters at E&E News, which covers energy and climate issues, they hatched a plan to do a massive relay. Each journalist would drive through a different region of the US in an electric vehicle.
So we wanted to have 9 reporters travel 8,000 miles around the country in a big counterclockwise arc, starting in Houston and finishing in Southern California. And along the way, experience all the challenges that exist for brand new technology for getting us around. And we wanted to capture how we were starting to come to grips with this profound change.
The United States occupies a unique place in the world of driving. Compared to people in other developed countries, Americans drive more, they drive longer, and they pay less for fuel. So getting drivers in the US to swap out gas-dependent cars for EVs is a different, and in many ways, more difficult challenge. In 2023, EVs made up 8% of new car purchases in the US, far less than in countries like Norway, Germany, or China. Right now, cars and trucks account for more than 16% of the US's total greenhouse gas emissions. To achieve goals set by the Paris Agreement, one study estimates that 90% of America's light-duty cars will need to be electric by 2050. Right now, we're at 1%.
Americans, we live in such a big country, and because we love to picture ourselves wandering and adventuring across it. We buy our vehicles for the experiences we romantically imagine ourselves having, rather than the actual life we live.
And so with that in mind, actually testing out the idea of a road trip in an electric vehicle, it's an important test in terms of the American consumer and what they hope and dream that they will do in their vehicle.
Yeah.
What will it take to win over more Americans? Is it the country's infrastructure? Is it about the cars themselves? Or is it something about us? My name is Arielle Duhaime-Ross, and this is The World as You'll Know It. In 2019, basically a lifetime ago in clean energy years, there were 15 different models of electric vehicles available in the US, more than ever before.
The all-electric BMW i3.
The tech-advanced Nissan Leaf, the best-selling electric vehicle of all time.
The all-new Kia Niro EV.
Global sales of EVs topped 2 million, and the online publication Quartz declared 2019 the year the electric vehicle grew up. To do this electric road trip, David Ferris and the reporters at E&E News asked a few different manufacturers to loan them EVs, and it mostly worked. Automakers were eager for coverage of their new vehicles.
It was my job to travel out of Minneapolis to North Dakota, across North Dakota, then a long way west until I got to Washington State and then down south into California.
But when David Ferris, the journalist on the road trip, told the car makers what stretch of America he planned to drive, he struck out hard.
No one would loan us a car for this trip across the upper Midwest. It wouldn't say why, but I suspect it's because in 2019, there was no greater charging desert in the country than North Dakota.
Right.
They didn't want to show how poorly their cars would do in that area.
But not wanting to back down from this challenge, Ferris went all in.
I actually said to my wife, "Hun, we're going to need to buy an EV."
Ferris bought an electric Kia Niro. That model cost about $39,000, had an estimated range of 217 miles, and importantly, took 45 hours to fully charge at home. On October 5th, 2019, he hit the road.
When I sallied forth from Minneapolis to Fargo, North Dakota, it turns out I did some things wrong. So people have heard or have experienced that electric vehicles have a lot of pep. When you're in one, you kind of feel like you're in a car on steroids. And so I was enjoying that whole experience, and about maybe slightly less than halfway on the route, I was like, wow, my range is really dropping here. It took me, unfortunately, a little bit of a long time to make the connection to be like, oh, oops, if I keep driving this fast, I'm not going to make it. I know that there's this one town called Fergus Falls that has a charger at a library and a charger at a brewery. That's where I need to get to. And it's getting to the point where, like, I really don't know if I'm going to make it. So what started out as this confident joyride ended up being me cruising along at 50 miles an hour in the slow lane, hoping I wasn't pissing anyone off too badly, with the car blaring at me like, disaster is imminent. And I get off the road and kind of limp through town. And the charging station, I put that in quotation marks, was an outlet on the wall.
Ferris ended up spending 4 hours charging his car at the brewery. During that time, he slowly sipped on a beer and thought about what this all meant for the future of the EV road trip.
The EV for the road trip is something that requires you to manage your expectations, to scale back, to plan, to be efficient about things. It isn't quite the open up the throttle experience we're used to.
And also maybe no detours.
Yes. The very first question that's going to come to mind if you're thinking about visiting, like the biggest ball of yarn in North America or whatever, is there a charging station at the ball of yarn?
There just weren't enough chargers. That was Ferris's key takeaway after his trip 5 years ago. But a lot has changed for EVs since 2019. So when we talked, I asked him to explain the current state of EV charging in the US. And his mind went straight to the federal government.
When Joe Biden won the election, that had a huge impact on the prospects for electric vehicles. He saw the electric vehicle as a two-pronged strategy. One is as a way to combat climate change. He also saw it as a competitive issue and an economic development issue, where we could create a whole new domestic industry, all the way from the mine to the processors to the battery to the car, that would enhance Americans' competitiveness with China and also create scads of jobs.
But there are still headaches. To understand how EV chargers work and to get a handle on the challenge of installing them, we decided to speak with an expert.
If you walk into our office, you'll see like right where the ceiling grid meets the wall, we've just lined our entire office with all of these charging systems.
Joseph Barletta is the CEO at Smart Charge America, a company that installs EV chargers. Their office in Austin, Texas, also doubles as a sort of museum of EV charging, where devices dating back to 1996 are on display.
We have to replace a lot of old, antiquated charging systems that are no longer operational. They're discontinued by the manufacturer. And so we have like a little obituaries along each one that kind of tells like when they were established, you know, when they stopped manufacturing. It's kind of like when they were born and when they died.
To understand the charging challenge, it helps to know about the different types of chargers, which are identified by levels. Level 1 is just a cable that connects to a standard 3-prong outlet in your wall, or on the side of a brewery if you're David Ferris. Those can take up to 60 hours to give your EV a full charge. Level 2 is what you see in more and more home garages. It requires a professional installation and knocks down the charging time to roughly 10 hours. But out on the road, most people don't want to wait hours to charge. What most people want is a level 3 charger.
That's only geared towards commercial sites. So those are very much high-powered charging systems where you would pull up, you'd plug in, and 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, you're ready to go. You have 300 miles recouped in your battery pack, and then you just head on off to, you know, do your daily driving as is. So those are generally placed at, kind of similar to gas stations.
So level 3, or what Barletta usually calls DC fast charging, is the charger you really want when you're out on the road. Many, including Barletta, think they're essential to getting more people to buy EVs. Unfortunately, it's a lot harder to get these chargers up and running.
If a level 2 charging station is about $7,000 per port and takes me about 3 days to put in, most likely it's going to cost me about $70,000 per port on the DC fast charging side, and it's going to take me 30 days from start to construction to finish to put those in.
And installation? That only happens after you've done the studies to make sure that the site can accommodate that kind of equipment, and you've gotten the permits and all the approvals and, of course, the funding. You get the idea. But if that's what's needed to convince people to go electric, how is the U.S. supposed to jumpstart this new network of super fast chargers?
The Great American Road Trip is going to be fully electrified. Charging stations will be up and easy to find as gas stations are now.
This Joe Biden speech dates back to 2022, when the president addressed a crowd full of auto union workers at the Detroit Auto Show. Because these workers have a vested interest in the future success of American EVs. A year earlier, as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, Biden allocated $7.5 billion to build out charging infrastructure.
The Biden administration proposing new standards to build 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations with additional funds to source.
The U.S. government wants a level 2 or 3 charging station every 50 miles on interstates and highways. That's 500,000 chargers over 79,000 miles of road, which sounds great, in theory. But huge problems have popped up. Think back to David Ferris's 2019 road trip and those charging deserts out west. After the infrastructure bill was passed in 2021, Ferris went back to look at some of those deserts to see if new chargers were on the way.
A lot of those are supposed to be on freeways, and some of those are in Wyoming. And the interesting thing I found out is that Wyoming, alone among states, said to the Biden administration, no thanks, we don't want the money.
Really?
So much of our state is so remote that in the places where you want us to build these chargers, there is literally nothing. There is no gas station. There is no electrical infrastructure. There's no parking lot. I stopped at the spot where at this particular interval where the federal government would like a station built, for example, and there was just a fence to keep cattle out and a dirt turnaround. And you don't want to build something that is going to break down and be vandalized because there's no one there to support it either.
Right.
And so I think that gets to this clash between what the government wants and the reality that people experience in different parts of the country.
The other big problem is that charging stations break down. Drivers arrive at a station only to find that the plug is busted, or the power isn't working, or for whatever reason, the software has gone haywire and the charger doesn't recognize your car. On top of all of that, installing a level 3 charging station can take so long that by the time it's running, it's already outdated.
And then the suppliers, they're not even supplying the repair parts for those older chargers.
So things need to move a lot faster.
They need to move a lot faster.
The government's plan aims to build a network of 500,000 level 2 and level 3 chargers by 2030. Now, as of March 2024, 7 had been installed. If you're listening to this and you own an EV, you are either nodding vigorously at what you're hearing or banging your head against the steering wheel. Because not all EV owners have this experience. Some EV owners have Teslas. There are plenty of controversies surrounding the company, including about the safety of its cars. But if you're looking for a robust, reliable charging network,
the reality is that we already have that. It's just the Tesla network. And the reason why if you have a Tesla, you have access to the Tesla supercharging network is because Tesla is fully integrated from vehicle to charging station site. So the station's able to talk to the electric vehicle. It's a fully integrated stack. It's very rare that you hear Tesla drivers complaining about the Tesla supercharging network because it's so dependable. It's so reliable because they control all of that.
Our interview took place before Tesla laid off most of the team responsible for its EV charging stations. Maybe not the best sign for the future of charging reliability. But on a more positive note, Tesla has made deals with other EV manufacturers like Ford and GM to standardize the charging ports across the industry. So all EV drivers might soon have access to most, if not all, charging stations. It's still early days, though, and getting people to change their behaviors and think differently about gassing up is challenging.
I have 42 employees, and I brainwash all of my employees, like everything about EVs and how great they are. And charging is 98% of it's done at home. And if you buy an EV and you have a home, I'll come out and I'll install your charging station for free if you're an employee. And still, I only have two people here in the office that drive EVs.
Wait, really? That's wild.
Believe it or not. So actually, three.
But what about the other part of the equation? You know, the car itself and the thing powering it. What if we just had better batteries? The basic battery, as we know it today, has been around for more than 200 years. Thomas Edison even designed cars in the early 1900s that ran on battery power. But Ford's internal combustion engine took over the market. Now, there have been improvements to batteries over the years, but finding the right combination of chemicals and materials has been somewhat slow. Until now. With climate change happening all around us, the field of batteries has straight up exploded, with billions of dollars funding new research into energy storage systems. And many of those dollars are flowing directly into electric vehicle battery development. Dr. Linda Faye Nazar is a professor of chemistry and nanotechnology at the University of Waterloo. She's had a front seat for all of this change.
I became aware of batteries when I started a postdoctoral research fellowship at Exxon Corporate Research in New Jersey. And I worked there for a scientist who was named Alan Jacobson.
This was in the mid-'80s. Alan Jacobson had been hired by a scientist who eventually won a Nobel Prize for his work on batteries. So it makes sense that Nazar caught the battery bug.
Alan and I used to have these Friday afternoon experiments where we would just go and sort of play around and do things in the lab, and that happened to mostly concern batteries. In all honesty, I was intrigued by simply the fundamental chemistry and physics behind it, and also the electrochemistry, which was something that was new to me and I found very challenging and interesting.
One of the biggest revolutions in battery technology came with the invention of the rechargeable lithium-ion battery in the 1970s. Sony sold the first commercial lithium-ion battery to power a handheld camera in 1991.
It has the highest energy density of any battery that we know. And that is because lithium ions are very light, one of the lightest elements in the periodic table.
And even though these batteries are everywhere today, from smartphones to motorboats, back then the idea that they would one day be able to power an entire car wasn't always obvious to everyone.
There was a period of time when I think the automotive companies really didn't believe that EVs would take off. We have a national newspaper in Canada called the Globe and Mail, and they had a section called Drive. Every week they would have these people talking about cars, and they categorically stated that there was no way that EVs would actually really amount to anything. Mm-hmm. And I was so furious, I wrote my one and only letter to the newspaper saying, "You are so lacking in foresight. I mean, you don't seem to understand this."
In 2022, more than 97% of the electric vehicles produced around the world were powered by lithium-ion batteries. These batteries are basically what have allowed EVs to become what they are today. But they're not perfect. For one thing, they're expensive. Even though between 2008 and 2022, the cost of EV batteries decreased by almost 90%, it still costs between $6,500 and $20,000 to replace an EV battery. There are also safety concerns. These batteries weigh a lot, which makes EVs heavier than comparable gas-powered vehicles, and therefore more destructive in collisions. Also, those heavier batteries can pose a fire risk during crashes.
There's always a way to minimize the risk, but you will never remove it completely. I mean, batteries fundamentally are storing a lot of energy.
Right.
And when you think even now of how many batteries are in EVs, you don't really hear about, in other words, not cars bursting into flames sort of every day on every street corner.
Another often unseen issue with EV batteries is the human cost of mining for some of the materials they require. Cobalt is toxic to touch and breathe, yet hundreds of thousands of workers in the Democratic Republic of the Congo handle it for dollars a day. This is where an estimated 70% of the world's cobalt comes from.
We're trying to remove the cobalt from these materials because of the problems with cobalt mining in Africa.
As for the problems with the cost and safety of electric vehicles, some battery experts are pinning their hopes on a whole new model, the solid-state battery.
Some of our community thinks they're always going to be restricted to smaller devices, and other parts of our community think that they're going to be in EVs in a few years. They really do overcome a lot of those safety issues. And the advantage of the solid-state batteries is not just in safety, but they actually can, without changing almost any of the chemistry, you can increase the energy density.
Which means longer ranges.
And on top of that, they have a wider temperature and operation range and temperature. They can work better at low temperature because they don't have a viscous electrolyte that becomes even more viscous when it cools down.
Standard lithium-ion batteries generate power through an electrochemical reaction involving that viscous electrolyte. And when the weather gets colder, the increased viscosity slows that reaction down, which in turn means the battery drains way faster. In January, when Chicago was hit by a massive winter storm, dozens of EV drivers were left stranded on the road because their cars couldn't maintain a charge. To make things worse, when they arrived at a charging station, the chargers often weren't working.
The low temperatures have caused some headaches for owners looking to charge their cars.
These are Tesla drivers.
Oh, we got a bunch of dead robots out here.
Dead robots.
A lot of people enjoyed making fun of these stranded drivers, but nobody wants to worry that their car won't work if the weather gets too cold. Battery experts like Nazar believe an EV with a solid-state battery would be better equipped to deal with a wide range of weather conditions. But
they're not commercial yet. Toyota claims that they have a solid-state battery that will power an EV for 745 miles. In our community, we're all excited about that. And I think many other car manufacturers are jumping into that fray as well. So there's a lot of movement afoot here in this area. And I can't imagine that good things aren't going to come of it.
745 miles is almost 2.5 times the range of the current Tesla Model Y, which is the #1 selling EV in America. So if Toyota actually comes through with this battery, that would be a major improvement. But Nazar says there could be other challengers to the supremacy of the lithium-ion battery.
So, for example, people are looking at sodium-ion batteries. Mm-hmm. They don't have the energy density of their lithium-ion analogs yet, and they never will. But they present real advantages in terms of cost. I think I would need the fingers of both hands to tell you how many startups and also large companies are starting to move into sodium-ion batteries.
That's interesting. Okay.
People are looking, and they have been looking for a long time, at lithium-sulfur batteries because sulfur is so low cost. So there's a lot of new battery chemistries that are starting to come out. There's going to be different batteries for, shorter range, longer range, aviation, drones, things that'll want to power a home robot where safety is absolutely critical.
Well, that sounds exciting. I know you can answer this question in different ways, but how much better are batteries going to get, and is there a limit to how much we can improve them?
It's hard to say how much better they're going to get, because when you're not there yet, you can't see what's ahead. There will be some batteries that will be much better in terms of cost, but they might not be better in terms of energy density and
therefore range, right?
Yeah.
So the future of electric vehicles will probably include a lot more than a battery with a longer range. Some people will always want EVs that can complete a cross-country road trip, and hopefully they'll have plenty of chargers at their disposal.
It's really hard to describe how big the change underfoot is.
David Ferris, the Politico reporter, has become a huge believer in EVs. He kept the car that he bought for his road trip in 2019, and he's bought another one since.
There is an entire new industry, or even I think you could say a set of industries rising right now. I think the current number is $78 billion of private industry money being spent to stand up literally from the ground, from the mine industry, to be able to create the batteries and then from there to create the cars. And I can't think of any other time where so much industry has been stood up in such a short period of time.
For me, the future of EVs is wireless charging.
Joseph Barletta, CEO of Smart Charge America, sees a world where you don't have to plug in at all. You simply pull up over a wireless charger and drive off when you're done. Some city buses already do this, but figuring out how to make this happen commercially is a whole other thing.
It's going to take 5-10 years to get there, but eventually, hopefully, we will be looking at that, wireless charging capability.
In the next few years, there will be bidirectional charging. Instead of just using the grid as a mechanism to charge your battery at night when you drive your car into your garage, your car battery, if it's full, can actually be used to deliver energy to the grid, but it can also be used to take it back out. And if you have enough of this going on and enough cars doing this, it's a completely different sort of way of stabilizing the grid during peak hours.
In the meantime, EV owners have had to adapt and change the way they look at road trips. Because with EVs, it's not just gas up and go. There's a wait time built in for charging. And that difference could have the kinds of effects we're only beginning to imagine.
The country and the economy are waking up to the fact that EV drivers are going to need to do something while they're parked, charging their cars. And being good capitalists, they're going to find out entertaining, absorbing things for those drivers to do that they can charge and make money for.
The need to stay in place. That could be the thing that helps many of us get back in touch with the true spirit of the great American road trip.
We've ended up visiting a lot of weird little quirky places that happened to be the one that hosted the charger. That was just a little off the beaten track, maybe a little spur off the road. And those end up being the moments of the trip you remember.
On the next episode of The World as You'll Know It, we'll explore the past, present, and future of nuclear energy.
Once the United States and other countries realized that there was no shortage of uranium in the world, it began to be possible to think about using nuclear technology not only for wartime, but also for peacetime.
A sort of one-to-one switch out of unabated coal plants with new, smaller, modular nuclear reactors or even gigawatt-scale reactors could really leverage not just that electric grid, those high-voltage power lines that are hoping for a centralized, reliable, consistent energy source, but also the workers and the communities in that vicinity.
I'm Arielle Duhaime-Ross. We'll be back next week. The World as You'll Know It is brought to you by Aventine, a nonprofit research institute creating and sharing work that explores how today's decisions could affect the future. The views expressed don't necessarily reflect those of Aventine, its employees, or affiliates. For a transcript of the episode and more resources related to what you've heard in today's episode, please visit aventine.org/podcast. Danielle Mattoon is the executive director of Aventine. Bruce Headlam is the editorial director at Aventine. This episode was produced by Elliot Adler, with support from Alexis Moore, Lisa Cerda, and me, Arielle Duhaime-Ross. Additional writing and producing from Bruce Headlam. Our editor is Eric Mennel. Camila Kashani is our managing producer. Original music by Vera Weber and Davey Sumner, with additional music from Epidemic Sound. This episode was mixed by Marina Pais. Our recording engineers are Pedro Alvira, Hannes Brown, and Davey Sumner. Additional support from Sharon Bardalis and Jade Brooks. Research and fact-checking by Will Tavlin. Creative direction and design by Kurt Courtney and Lauren Vieira. Music licensing by Extreme Music and Epidemic Sounds. Our executive producer is Jay Ann Barry. Special thanks to Emerald O'Brien and Zandra Ellen. I'm your host, Arielle Duhaime-Ross. Make sure to listen to us on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.